So, I want to start by asking a question. Have you ever looked back on a moment you've shared with your family, or your friend, or your sibling, and realized you both remember it completely differently? It's weird, right? It's weird how that happens. Maybe it was a simple conversation between the two of you, or maybe it was like something intense, like a fight. But somehow, when you're both recalling the details of the event, it doesn't really match up between the two of you. Well, I have a story. Well, this one time I was at this event and I met these two amazing siblings, a brother and a sister. And we were just talking about our lives, growing up in general, when the strangest thing happened. When each of the siblings told me stories about them, they had told me completely different versions of it. And it wasn't just about themselves that was different, it was about the other siblings' childhood. At one point, I was talking with the sister for a while, and she opened up to me and she said how she felt like her parents treated her way more differently than how they treated her brother, saying that their parents gave the brother special treatment. And hearing this, I told the brother, I asked him what he thought about it, and he disagreed. And he said that he thought both of their parents treated them both pretty equally. So hearing this in mind, I went back to the sister and I told her what I just heard. And she was confused. And she told me that his view wasn't right and that that's not true. And here's the thing. These two siblings, they're super close, okay? They love each other, they support each other, and they're basically inseparable. But even with all that closeness in mind, they still saw their own past, their very same past, in two completely different ways. And I can't help but think about my own siblings with this. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and we grew up in the same house, in the same environment, with the same parents and everything. But if you asked us to describe our childhood, you'd probably think that we grew up in three completely different homes. And so, I wonder, with that in mind, how can two or more people experience the same things in the same moment at the same time, but come out with completely different outcomes of it? And so I figured out there are three main factors to this. And first, we start off with perception. So what perception is, it's essentially, I did this in my AP psychology class, and essentially it's about how we take in information from the world. But more importantly, it's also about how we make our own versions of it. And psychologists, they like to break this into 5 stages. First, we start off with stimulation. Now, in this stage, it's where your senses are constantly taking everything in. So your sense of sight, taste, hearing, sense, they're all taking everything that's currently happening right now. So maybe it's your sense of hearing taking in my voice, or your sense of sight taking in me or the presentation. After that, we move on to organization. Now in this stage, your brain will use this, what it has taken in, and it will organize it based on your previous experiences, your previous knowledge, in order to try and make sense of it. It's kind of like comparing your test answers to your friend. You usually compare to try and make sense and see what you did right and what they did wrong to try and make sense of it. And that's essentially what's happening in our brain in this stage. And then we move on to interpretation. Now in this stage, it's a really tricky thing because with interpretation, it's completely different from everybody. One people, they might interpret a thing differently from the other because of their emotions and what they feel and their experiences. So, and this creates a story. In interpretation, your brain will weave out a story in your brain from your side to try and understand what's happening. And finally, we move on to the last 2 stages, which is memory and recall. Now in this stage, your brain will store that experience, store that story in your brain, and the next time you want to think about it or re-access it, you're doing the final stage, which is recall. So it's not just about the event that happened itself, but it's rather about the stages of it, how you felt, what you felt during it, how you organized it, and the emotions that impacted it. But there's also another thing that affects how we look at life and our past experiences and why we view them differently. And it's because of our memory. We like to think of our memory as something that's reliable, as something that we can trust. But truthfully, memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And what I mean by this is that within our memory, when we think back about something, we're not playing the exact snapshot of what happened. Instead, we're rebuilding that memory piece by piece, removing what we like, removing what we don't like, adding what we like, which is influenced by our emotions and our experiences. And this can be a little bit biased. So think back about the first story I've told you about the two siblings. One remembered their parents treated them differently, while the other remembered their parents treating them both equally. And that's the thing about our memory. Our memory is different for everybody, and it's shaped how we remember because of what we chose to focus on, how we felt during the time, and what we deemed is more important. And the final factor to why we see these things differently, why we see an experience differently, is because of our filters. So things such as past experiences, our emotions, our motives, our cultural background, and our beliefs, they all come and form a filter for us, our eyes and our brains, to view and perceive the world. Think of the phrase wearing rose-colored glasses. It basically tells you to look on the positive side and ignore all the bad side, and that's essentially what filters are. And for me, these filters, they shaped me and my experiences growing up. Because from a young age, I realized two things. First, that I was part of the LGBTQ plus community, and second, I realized being part of this community meant that I wouldn't be accepted everywhere I go. Sometimes I saw how I would get unusual looks at me or weird comments about my sexuality. And I've also realized how the word gay was usually used in a way that was to degrade others or as an insult or a joke, not as something people said to be proud of. And I remember this one time, I was walking with my sister down the hallway when we came across these group of teenage boys just laughing and joking around when we both heard someone make a joke, "That's so gay." And, my mind just stopped and I felt a weight on my chest. Because while it wasn't directed at me, it really didn't have to be, because by then, I'd already learned what the word gay meant to people and what they meant by it, what they were trying to imply, and the context behind it. So I looked over at my sister. And she was totally unfazed. She did not care, and she was completely unbothered and just continued walking like nothing had happened. Because to her, that joke, those words, didn't mean a thing to her. But then to me, that joke, those words, they were the reminder of every single time I felt different, I felt weird, and I felt like I had to hide a part of myself. And then it clicked. My perceptions, my emotions, my memory, and my filters, these were all of the things that then shaped to who I am as a person. And if this is true for me, then what does it mean for all of us in the audience? Well, the thing is, our memory, they are completely different. Our perceptions, and these are the things that makes us see the world, and they're completely different from everybody. And it also has a ripple effect on your life. It affects what you do, the actions you take, how you communicate, and it also affects the fight you have. Think of a workplace environment with two coworkers and one boss going into the same meeting. One coworker, one of them might focus on the positive compliments that the boss gave, the good feedbacks and everything that's nice about the boss. While the other coworker, they might focus on the criticism, the negative feedback, and everything that's negative. Even though they're at the same meeting, they chose to focus on two completely different things. And that's the same with our friends, Even in our friends, this can create a distance. Especially during fights, if we don't understand why our friends react the way they do, and if we don't really console them, this can create a large distance and a tension between the two of you. And it can cause misunderstandings, miscommunications, and a deeper crack within the friendship. So hearing this, how do we resolve this? How do we resolve this underlying tension between the two of you, or people that you're arguing with or have two completely separate views with? Well, first, there are three things that we can do. And the first thing is we listen. We open our ears, have a chat with them, and we have to hear what they have to say to us. Even if you don't like it or not, we open our ears, and we listen. The second thing that we can do is validate. So after hearing their experiences, after trying to listen to what they have to say to us, we validate. Even if their experiences doesn't exactly match with ours, it's important that we put ourselves in their shoe and understand why would they feel these type of emotions, or why would they do these type of certain things. And lastly, we give grace. And what I mean by this is that we treat their view with the kindness and respect in hopes that they will treat ours the same way. Because just like how we carry our own emotions, other people also carry theirs. Because at the end, how we view things, it's so completely different from one another that you might be wondering, what even is the truth in that situation, in that past? And the truth is, there's no one single way to view a moment. No right or wrong way to see something. And I like to think of it as a coin, you know? There are two sides to a coin, but at the end of the day, it's still part of the same coin. And that's with our lives as well. Maybe it's not about proving which side is right or which side is wrong, but maybe it's more about understanding that there will always be another side, another part of our story. Thank you.